social work. Research opportunities occur all the time through our faculty at Crane and above and beyond. So focus groups, IRB studies. And then we also have an archival research database where all of the progress monitoring and curriculum information that we have, faculty can have access to do kind of post hoc studies. So a lot going on in addition to the daily lives of 100 children and families back in the school. So it is right behind me. We'll see how quiet we stay. It's nap time. We started in the chat, but if you could continue to put where you're from, who you work with. We'll talk a little bit more about what you hope to get out of this session. Hopefully we can tailor the chat and such to that. But when I was thinking about this, I sort of outlined some objectives in terms of all of us reflecting on the varied experiences of children and families prior to kindergarten entry. We have some new data directly that reflects that. We could look together at what readiness for children means, what readiness for families means, and what readiness for elementary schools means as well. Sometimes that's overlooked. Of course, we're going to dive into some evidence-based strategies to support kindergarten transition, both with children and families and within elementary and pre-K. And then to learn from each other, what you do, what's worked well, what is an opportunity for growth, as we like to say. And also, just to be perfectly clear, I don't have an A plus B equals C. I don't have a little list that you'll get at the end that shows if you do this, kindergarten transition will be assured to be smooth and seamless. Because what we know, all of us from working with children and families, is that everything can be individualized and not only to the place where you're based, but to children and families. So we'll talk in broad terms, I think, and then maybe get down to brass tacks in the experiences that you all have and can share with us too. So again, if you have goals or particular, like, I hope you're going to get to this, put it in the chat and we'll do our best to revisit that and continue to put in who you work with and what kinds of kindergarten transition or strategies that you've used in the past. Something I hoped that was a happy coincidence is that our colleagues in Crane, my colleagues on the second floor, recently just released on Wednesday, Early Care and Education in Franklin County Landscape Study. So I was involved in this and knew it was coming up, and it was just the perfect storm that was released this week because it talks about what are the experiences of children in Franklin County prior to entering kindergarten, and how does that transition across elementary school. So all of the resources that I have, they'll be in the last slide, and we can certainly put those up in the chat too. This study is on our website at earlychildhood.ehe.osu.edu. That'll be as well. So if you wanted to read the complete study or see some of the questionnaires, that is certainly available to you. The big takeaways, of course, this was Franklin County only. That's Ohio's most populous county, but it's just an example. Your area may be very different, but what I took away from this study is, that a big takeaway was about half the children had care outside of the home prior to kindergarten. Of that half, about 85% were in an early childhood education program. The remaining 15% were in a private home. And then the remaining other half were cared for in their own home. So this vast, disparities in where people are prior to coming to kindergarten. What we know is that research done on kindergarten transition often is focused on the knowns, right? That often research is done when there's a pre-K in a public school and a kindergarten right next door, right down the hall, and they study that transition and report out. A lot of research on kindergarten transition is also done in Head Start programs, and they're transitioning to a known district or a known kindergarten. So, I say this just to sort of set the stage that we have to consider that many of the families that we work with are going to come from very different situations, could come from different countries. different states prior to entering into kindergarten. So what we know is that kindergarten is a critical transition in a child's continuing education trajectory. So when we think about what we want to spend our time on, what we want to invest in, if we invest in this, we have to be ready to pivot, be ready to change course, be ready to alter, depending on the population that's joining us, maybe that year, or maybe you get a good handle on where you are and know that this many children come from these 4 early education programs, they come into these 4 different kindergartens, and we can do really well with a really tight transition schedule for that. We're going to talk about how we can foster a thoughtful transition into kindergarten, and no matter where your children are coming from or where they're going to. Oftentimes I find the families I work with, where they're going to for kindergarten may change August 25th. It may change September 9th. Sometimes families start at a kindergarten, something happens and they move to another one. So we're really looking at broad terms, not just you are going to this kindergarten and it's going to be exactly like this. But take a look if you can at that landscape study. I think for those of us in the field, it really is a good insight. It's all parent interviews and a really good insight, regardless on parent perspectives on early childhood. So you see a lot in the literature now on kindergarten readiness and children, right? One thing we know is that most often the most qualifying factor is the child's chronological age. If you're 5, you're going to kindergarten, at least in Ohio, in most districts. Even that's different by district and state. Even in our school serves predominantly Columbus City schools. We're right smack dab in the middle of that district, but of course suburban families come in. People choose public and charter schools. So of about 35 graduates a year, we have children going into about 28 different schools. Of those districts, some do the August 1st cutoff date, some do September 30th. Many private schools will screen children and then say they could use another year of pre-K, even if their birthday was in the summer or May, might advise families to have another year of pre-K. So we call another year of pre-K redshirting. Sometimes you see that referred to as redshirting in the literature. And I would say that's one of the most common conversations I have with families. In Ohio, it can be really common, if you can afford tuition for another year of early education, for families to pay for another year of pre-K for children who have a summer birthday, sometimes even a spring birthday. I've had children with March and May birthdays who are advised by a school district to have another year of pre-K. What we know from research, and again, this is another article that is referred to for you, is that while that might benefit initially in the start of kindergarten, those benefits nearly always fade out as the child matures and ages. So that if thinking long-term, you might think, oh, this is gonna make my child score great on the ACT, or they are going to be the best football player that ever bested. Oftentimes what research shows is those advantages fade as the maturation of children sort of, you can't really tell the difference too much between a sophomore and senior in college. So that is what happens eventually as children just mature. There's a lot of reasons for redshirting though. It might be parents are having a baby that year and they don't want to have a kindergarten transition. Might be that there's a lot going on in the home. So we really talk that through with families because it is a long-term decision that they're making. But I find the redshirting article attached here can be really helpful to families. We talked a little bit about that redshirting sometimes pieces itself out as school goes on. We just really have to emphasize to families and to other educators that there's a vast developmental difference between a fresh 5-year-old and a almost 6-year-old. We're talking about 60 to 72 months in developmental differences. That's a big deal that young. When you look at a newborn and you look at a 12-month-old, there's a vast developmental difference. And so keeping that in mind as kindergarten educators or as elementary school welcoming children, that not everybody is going to be at that stage where they can line up with their hands on their hips and a bubble on their lips or whatever the phrase may be, but they might get there. And it's our job to do that with them. So I really like this quote, and we're going to talk about this book ad nauseum. The Pianta and Kraft Sayre book about kindergarten transition is a really good resource to have. And if you don't have it and you work extensively in kindergarten transition, I recommend it as a guidebook for you, and we'll refer to it a lot. So rather than just talking about readiness as a child product, as something that they need to be ready for kindergarten, that we really look at it just like any other developmental model, that there's lots of things that influence that readiness, and that we can be a part of that and being ready to meet the child where they're at too. If you're unfamiliar or wondering about some of the key things that are important in kindergarten transition and readiness, certainly social foundations and language and literacy are right there. And I love social emotional development. It's probably why I work with this age group so long. And the pandemic has sort of laid bare how important social foundations or mental health or wellness for anybody in education is, whether they're high schoolers, middle schoolers, college age students. It's the most important part of being in a community of learners. And so to act like that's just a secondary, no, they have to know their letters, no, they have to have math skills. Certainly, we're going to work on those things. But for our very youngest children, the routines, the consistency, being able to take turns and take others' perspectives, being able to be around others unlike themselves, and learning about new communities, new individuals is so important. The impulse control that children develop while they're in pre-K or at home with families and then going into kindergarten is really critical. That's what kindergarten teachers talk about often. And it's the forerunners to the executive functioning and critical thinking that we expect from Ohio students by the time they graduate. So all those things layer up. Being able to take turns is not just a one-off, oh, we'll get to that. It's a really important part of being ready for kindergarten. And then the other thing I love and is very important, according to research, is language and literacy, right? You can't learn about math if you don't have good language skills. You can't learn about history and science if you can't read to get that information. So in early childhood education, we talk a lot about conversations, listening to young children, the serve and return, the listening to what they say, building on it and asking for more. All of that builds the vocabulary, narrative skills, and phonological awareness that we know are key predictors to later school success as readers and writers. So if you're working with families and they want to know what to do at home to get their children ready, the reading, the language and literacy, the listening to your children, it's not so much worksheets, it's not so much dittos or kindergarten workbooks. It is talking with them, sharing conversations and building on what they have to say and building in those reading times that then are kind of the forerunners to homework times. So in some ways, the readiness for children is part of the easiest process. That's on pre-Ks, right? That's what they do best. They have the children, they should be doing that. When we look at what readiness for families is, that's a really interesting concept. And part of this is from the research, and part of it's just from 22 years of working with children in the transition. I talked about our school, not so much about me. I was a pre-K teacher for 11 years, and I've been in an administrator role for another 11. So have gone through this transition many, many times, but always in Central Ohio. I'm a Central Ohio native and now working here all the time. So readiness for families, a big key to that is the recognition that there is a difference between home and pre-K and school and kindergarten. That yes, when you go to kindergarten, there will be more children in the room, and there may be one teacher, and there may be one teacher with one aide. Pre-COVID notwithstanding, you may not be seeing your kindergarten teacher every day. That often is a big change for families who have been in a pre-K program where they dropped off and picked up, and now they're not seeing their kindergarten teacher, and they see that as less than. They see the kindergarten teacher as not wanting to partner with them or not wanting to communicate with them. that the emotional significance that there is that to the transition to kindergarten for families, that for some it's their first baby going off and they can't believe it. Sometimes it's your last baby and you can't believe it. Or just that lack of control that people say, particularly if you've had your child at home with you and now they're going out into the world and they can't believe that you don't let them have a snack at 10 a.m. They always had a snack at 10 a.m. at home. And so how are they going to adjust? Recognizing that difference and supporting it in families is something really important. We talked about the want of communication between schools. Families can often get overwhelmed in that month prior to kindergarten once they realize the reality of trying to juggle before and after care. There's a lot of districts in Ohio that still offer part-time kindergarten, sometimes exclusively part-time kindergarten. And that is often a wake-up call for families when they realize, wait, what am I doing the other, not 3 hours of the day? New school calendars, that the school day is 9 to 3, 9 to 3:30, that there are more professional development days, those 2 weeks at winters. That can be a big adjustment for families too. And that families are having age appropriate conversations with or around their children. So much like things encompassed with the pandemic, if you're stressed about the pandemic and you're talking about it all the time and it's a big scary thing and you're having adult conversations about the pandemic around your children, they're going to reflect that anxiety. Any change is stress. So the transition to kindergarten, even if a child is very excited about it and the parents are very excited about it, it's going to be a stressor for that family. So if other things are going on, and if parents say things like, I can't believe we got Miss Smith, that she's the worst teacher there. She did this, and the child is hearing that. That sets the tone for the upcoming year. If you're complaining about the drop-off line all the time or how long, you can't believe that kids have to wear masks this year. All of that goes into the child and colors their kindergarten experience. So we really encourage families to have another trusted adult in their lives, and maybe that's us, to vent those things to and help problem solve it, because it isn't really a productive thing to do in front of your child and can increase their stress. So now you have double the stress because your child is stressed and you're stressed. This is from, again, and here it is, right here, the Kraft and Sayers book, Kraft, Sayer and Pianta, that when families are offered transition activities, they often report barriers to participating in them. So, one thing I'll say about this little chart is that right away it says percentage of parents reporting the barrier. And I encourage all of us to use more inclusive terms like families, because very often in our program and in others, you have a grandma and an aunt raising a child, a mom and a grandma, and to say parents all the time, or parent night or parent conferences, often then negates for that child and that family, like, oh, this isn't for me, or I'm just the grandma, so I didn't know if I should go. So we welcome everybody. If grandma, mom, and dad want to come, and aunt is thrown in the mix, and a neighbor, that is great for us. We would welcome them. If they're part of your family, they're part of our family. But part of this is also looking at the barriers parents felt prohibited them from participating in school transition activities. Usually it's work, or they just didn't want to do it. But I think when you see this, you can see it's on us to design activities that families would want to participate in, and recognizing the barriers that families may encounter. Again, that may be something that's really unique to where you work. Certainly in Columbus, we have a really good bus line. A lot of parents have bus passes, so trying to arrange things around the bus schedule that's close to our program. And, one thing, if you're looking for a silver lining in the pandemic, it is that Zoom or other sort of virtual meetings have become really part and parcel of what we do. So it could be that everything that we do from now on, as things move forward, has a live action and also a way to participate via Zoom. Parents love texting apps. They also love social media. I mean, I don't know that everybody has the bandwidth to have a social media curator, but a way to send communications to your families in a way that comes straight to their phone, recognizing that everybody might not be on a computer all day for their work. So these are interesting to consider in terms of what keeps parents from participating. When they do participate, we can see that when families participate in transition activities, they probably found it useful, right? So it might not be so much that you have to find something that's just perfect that they're going to enjoy. You have to really think about the barriers that are keeping people from participating. And you look at the table, you can see those with the most participation. If you want to get the most bang for your buck, visiting a kindergarten classroom with a child, meeting teachers and principals and tours, that's what they found was most helpful. But really, we can see that if a parent participates in a transition activity, it seems like they're going to find it useful. They're going to find it helpful. And another takeaway from this, and it might be a little bit of causality on my part, is that the parents who line up to participate are the ones who then would say, yes, this was very helpful. So what probably all of us know on this call is, how are we really going to reach those hard to reach families, the ones who maybe don't feel as comfortable participating, or the ones who have more barriers than other families. We also, we talked about readiness for children. We talk about readiness for families and what they think about the transition for kindergarten and what they're expecting to participate in. There's also the readiness for elementary schools. It's not just a trajectory of we set it up and then launch them off into the stratosphere and we don't know where they land. We know where they'll land, but there could be several possible choices. So just keeping in mind that it's a school's job to be ready for a child if they're age eligible. Just like we individualize education for children who have special needs, every child has special needs. Every child has a history. So it's our job to be ready for them and accommodate that, not say, oh, they can't even line up. Oh, she can't write her name, but that we know and can adjust, because we know we're going to get a wide developmental range there. Explaining that to parents too, that there will be a wide developmental range. Sometimes parents on the first day are like, there were kids there that couldn't even write their names, and that's okay. Oftentimes children learn to write their names in kindergarten. So explaining the developmental differences that a family may see. Kindergartens, they're ready for kids. They also have a lot of stress those first weeks of school, right? They're getting their own KRA data. They're doing lots of different district screeners, beginning of the year tests, individual screeners. We hear a lot of times teachers have their own little screeners that they like to use. I've used this for years. I know where a kid's at if they do this, so I embed this as well. I do it on the side. It's a lot. And so what we'll talk about today is advocating for particular transition activities that aren't just pre-K and K teachers. If you have 30 kids in your classroom, you have 20 kids in your classroom, you probably have enough work to do. You have direct work to do with children. There may need to be an additional role that helps support this transition. We know that typically schools do informational nights or fairs about school choice in the winter prior to enter. And then right before kindergarten, they have a lot of maybe social events, school supplies, school pictures, anything. So it's sort of like a little something, typically, a little something in the winter, a little something like, hey, start to get your birth certificate together. Hey, start to get your immunizations together. And then a flurry of activity right before kindergarten. And so we're talking about the missed opportunity of all those months, maybe between January and August. We would look at more collaboration then between early childhood educators in districts and K to 12. Sometimes even within a district, pre-K is separate from K to 12. K to 3 is very separate from 4 or 5, and pre-K is sort of out on its own too. But these are the same children. One way or another, you're going to get them. A kindergarten is eventually going to be a 12th grader. So it would behoove everybody if the kindergarten teachers and the 12th grade teachers were on the same page. I've seen that sometimes in work with districts like, well, we're early childhood and that's kindergarten. So that's future school district problem. When really we want to mitigate some of the challenges that children and families face and districts then by starting everybody out on the right foot. Again, it shouldn't just be children with IEPs get all this specialized transition. Every child is a specialized learner. So we want things to be in place that can really support all children, and then particularly children who live at risk. Readiness for elementary schools. When we see why kindergarten teachers in particular choose not to participate or can't do transition activities, you can see some of the responses here. That it's not my job. It's not supported by my salary. It's supposed to be done in the summer. Something really common is that I don't know who's going to be in my class. The class lists were generated too late. Parents aren't interested. So you can see there are common barriers to why teachers in kindergarten and early education and elementary schools aren't participating. So we want to be a problem solver, not a problem worshiper. We know that somebody might say, I don't even know who's going to be in my class. I don't even know who's going to be in my school. So if that's a common issue in your district or in your programming, what are things that you can do that would be best for all children, no matter which kindergarten they landed in? Certainly, people not having support in the summer or that they're a 9-month appointee or something, I would advocate for investment in a transition role, or that the transition events are a supplemental comp that happens in the spring even, that you're creating items during the school year and trying to work through them through the spring, knowing that maybe all families are traveling, maybe there's a lot going on in the summer, but rather than hitting everybody with everything that week before school, that we get really clear about a gradual transition into kindergarten. Absolutely understand that class lists can't be generated, particularly some districts, and a lot of times research is done on this. You have, like I said, a Head Start class that all matriculate into this public pre-K, or the Head Start is part of the, into a kindergarten. The Head Start is a part of the school district. So that's really easy to do research on, but that's not really how the real world works often. So again, we're gonna emphasize the commonalities among school districts, among school kindergarten, the expectations. Certainly we talked about there's a wide range of development, but it is beneficial to any child to know how to write their name when they go into kindergarten. So certainly that's something we can work on and something that we can have as an expectation. This is from another study done by our organization on what teacher reported challenges were in transitioning to kindergarten by children. So this was about close to 700 children, about 45 teachers. This was a larger study, a longitudinal project from pre-K to 3rd grade in a diverse Central Ohio district. And you can see that the teachers reported that 72% of children experienced a challenge in being organized, meeting academic demands, working in groups. So rather than just wishing this away or saying, well, I don't know who's going to be in my class, so I'm not going to do anything about it. I know when you're a kindergarten teacher or a pre-K teacher for that matter, and you have a classroom and 72% of the children have these challenges, that is your problem. It's not future teacher problem, it's your problem now. So the investment in a coordinator to help to ease some of this and hopefully mitigate some of these challenges would be a worthwhile investment and something that we should all work towards. That same study showed percentage of children experiencing more than in 1 to 5 areas of difficulty, so that you could see, the takeaway from this is transition difficulties tend to co-occur, that 60% of children were reported of difficulty in more than 1 area. We have 30% who have challenges across all 5 areas that teachers reported. So we know from this study too, who was more likely to experience difficulties in the transition to kindergarten. And what, if you've been working with children and families for a while, it probably doesn't surprise you. In the study, the 2 child characteristics that were significantly related to the challenges reported in kindergarten were that boys were reported to have more difficulty and children with IEPs. And the household characteristics that were found when teachers reported out on challenges were lower family income and the number of children in the household. Actually, that a single child had reported more transition difficulties and having a home language other than English. So arming yourself with that information, you can also really try to do outreach and pinpoint to support families going in, and also prepare your elementary schools to say, how are you prepared to welcome boys? How are you prepared to welcome children with IEPs? What are the extra steps we're going to do ahead of time to mitigate some of these challenges that historically have been reported from educators once they receive their kindergarten classrooms? So I talked about earlier, you know, I don't have a playbook, or a, you know, I'm not Stroud. I don't have the quarterback thing on my arm to show you, oh, I know exactly what to do when you encounter this challenge. But we do know from research what best practices look like overall. And then it's upon us to use our expertise as educators or as family engagement specialists to sort of hone that down into our individual children, families, and neighborhood. So we know that family school connections are really important in best practices and transitions, so that you're doing a family needs assessment, that families are able to report out what is meaningful to them, what helps them in the transition to kindergarten, that maybe you have data from other years about what things were really highly attended, what weren't as well attended, what was meaningful to families. And if you don't have that data, that's a great place to start. Maybe you do what you've done for years, but this year you track data so that you can report out and advocate if you feel like you need more support or different support. You have family meetings at school and orientation sessions. Those things are all important, and again are outlined in the Sayers, Pianta and Kraft Sayers book. If you wanted more detail on any one of these, or sort of fine tuning, if you were like, yes, I want to do orientation sessions, what are the best ways to do that? Child school connections, that would be that you're practicing the kindergarten routines and pre-K, that teachers visit pre-Ks and talk about kindergarten and what that's going to be like, or that your class visits a kindergarten. It's not so important that they can visit the kindergarten that they are going to. We outlined all the reasons why that might not be a possibility at all. But going to a kindergarten classroom and seeing it, and seeing maybe that it's not so scary, maybe that it has all of the things that your pre-K does, maybe that it has desks is new, sort of demystifies the transition to kindergarten. So those child school connections are really important. Peer connections are also really important in transition. And our evidence shows that that helps children with successful transitions, so that you have purposeful classroom assignments. Something that we do here with parent permission is, you know, of my 30 to 40 graduates every year, we find out where they're going or where they think they're going. Sometimes those assignments haven't quite been made, or they think they're going to a particular school in the Columbus City district, but a space opens up in another and they can take that. But we will, with parent permission, connect them to other people who are going to their same school. So even if they weren't in the same classroom here, they have a familiar face and can see somebody or a parent that you start out with. So those peer connections are very important for families too. We work a lot with families who are from different countries, also families who just moved here to work at OSU, a lot of different young families who are coming here and don't yet have a social network built up of their own. So ways that you can support not only peer connections between children, but peer connections between families builds that healthy social network that helps to build for school success. in connection with future peers too, really emphasizing that those ice cream socials or other events that an elementary school may have are important for you to participate in, that are worthwhile of your time, and then to help parents mitigate any barriers in terms of transportation, work schedules, or how, if it was the thought of, well, I have to work that night, so we're not going to go. If you know the importance of those things, perhaps there is grandma, aunt, or you can hook them up with another family in your program so that they could go together. Another important part of best practices in kindergarten transition is those community connections. So the inter-school collaborations, really working on with your local districts and other schools, the kindergarten transition, that we talk about programs and practices. And it's okay if there's differences, that in pre-K, maybe they're eating in their classrooms at the little tables that they're also playing in, and it's different in kindergarten because they're going to go down to the cafetorium or auditorium or cafeteria, dining room, wherever they will eat. We don't have that here, but we can practice it. We can talk about it. We can build children's resilience in when you pack your lunch, this is what it's going to look like. So anticipating those changes when you know them. And then mostly what we've been talking about today is building policies related to this transition, that it's everybody's job and saves everybody time if children have a healthy and rewarding, successful transition to kindergarten. So to save the future district issues, investing now in teacher time, parent educator time, social worker or parent liaison time in smoothing this over is something, we'll talk about a lot today. Some additional tools that we have, and I'll give a shout out again to Barbara's organization and the Family Engagement Summit. They have wonderful tools online. Guide to choosing a school in Ohio. Oftentimes the parents are overwhelmed if they don't want to go to their local school district with the amount of school choice. Of course, we also do have school choice in several districts. Your own little district may have options within that. So choosing a school in Ohio, there's a great workbook checklist for parents to work through. Back to school planning for families. Again, if it's your first time out of the gate, or you find yourself in custody of a child in your family and you're sort of overwhelmed with how do I plan for back to school, this is a wonderful tool to sort of outline some of the things parents might not think about, like transportation, being at the bus. When we talk to our veteran families, those are the kind of things that really shook them, that they didn't realize that for a kindergarten you had to wait at the bus stop and be there in the morning and wait until they were picked up, and then wait there at 3 p.m. in the afternoon. The bus stop's right there. Why do I have to wait there? So some of those tips and tricks from veteran parents, I think, are really embedded in that back to school planning guide for parents. And there's a wealth of other resources there. Any librarian in any public library in Ohio would be happy to help you with books about kindergarten and transition. And that goes back to sometimes adults get overwhelmed. They start talking about the transition around their child or with their partner in front of their child, and the anxiety that it's producing, whether it's school choice, whether it's, I don't know how we're going to drop her off. You can't drop them off until 8:30, those kind of things. But a better way to support being excited about school and also meet all those language and literacy guidelines that we talked about are just really good quality children's literature on the transition to kindergarten. So there's of course this link that I have set up and others that you could easily find that just are really good books and that can talk about, like, look, how they line up at this school. Let's practice that even at home. If your house is like mine, you don't have 19 other preschoolers in your house, but you can still practice those things and sort of engage in that lexicon of, what big kids do, what big 5-year-olds do. For the almost unfailingly, our pre-Ks are so excited to be going to kindergarten. It might as well be going to college. It might as well be getting your driver's license. It may as well, they are the big kids and they leave like they're on the Love Boat, like, goodbye, I'm going going to kindergarten and I'm so big and you might miss me because I'm so big, I'm going to kindergarten. So we really want to enjoy that and celebrate that and not sort of tamp it down with any of the, yeah, well, you're going to have to wear a mask every day though, or anything else that might come up that would really sort of steal the child's thunder. And the kids' books are a wonderful way to do just that. We also have been partnering with SEAT on a Real Talk series, sometimes just talking with parents about some of the common challenges of early childhood. Could be things just like toilet training, because if you're trying to toilet train another child while going to kindergarten, that adds to your stress. But we did have a session on kindergarten transition as well as sibling rivalry, how to best read stories and share them at home. So that might be just a bag of tricks or a tool that could be helpful for you and your work with families. Certainly, there is a role all of us to play in the quote unquote academic readiness for children as they go into kindergarten. But part and parcel of that is even getting families to be aware that they play one of the most important roles in that. And I think that's probably why we're all here today. So some of the things we've talked about today is really, as outlined in a lot of the research that you'll see, there is a coordinator role or a transition role or a social worker involved in the school takes on that to determine how to best support the families in a particular school, a particular district with the transition to kindergarten. It really is community and school dependent. And one thing I would always advocate is that you're taking data on this, because it's one thing to have a small group in your district or team working on kindergarten transition. And you might say, oh, that'll never work. Nobody will ever come to that. I don't think anybody uses Zoom. But it's another thing to try it and then actually be able to show others, we did this, 3 people came, we're pivoting and gonna do this next. Or we did this, only 3 people came because we think this. So this is how we're going to adjust and learn from it. So data is your friend, but it's an additional time-consuming item, which again would go back to why it's important to have a coordinator there. So you're not just doing things that you've done year after year, or that a kindergarten teacher has done year after year, or a pre-K teacher has done year after year, but that you're doing it, taking data and adjusting, just like we do in classrooms with children all the time. That we know that there's a link between early childhood education and later child outcomes. We can do it cheaper right now. The return on investment for early childhood is huge. Anywhere in all of the studies, it's anywhere between, for every dollar you put into early childhood, you get $3 or up to $11 in return. So there's no doubt we're saving everybody money in the long run. You would much rather, as a district, invest in kindergarten transition, in smoothing that and preparing parents to be an active family member in the district than to invest in remedial reading or behavioral challenges in middle school and high school. We all know everybody's stealing soap off of shelves. I have a daughter in high school right now. Everybody, if you don't have a high schooler, everybody's taking soap and other things out of bathrooms and posting it on social media. And that's minor, right? So when you have to mitigate those things later on in high school, it's much more expensive than with our young folks. So hopefully now we could talk a little bit about what works well for you, what you've tried, what you want to hear from others, or others who work in a place that is like you. You can put stuff in the chat right now to say, like, do you have any more information about tactics or tricks that work, and let us know what you want to hear from each other. While we're doing that too, I can share with you some of the resources that I've served or that I've shared with you so that you can look them up or utilize them if you want a closer look. I mean, 45 minutes, an hour is never enough time to take a really deep dive. But, we have the book and a couple articles that really talk about kindergarten transition and delineate with data probably what a lot of us know who work with children.
Well, I want to encourage folks who are here to ask questions while you're here and this topic is fresh on their minds. I loved your description of it not being a ready child. It's about the adults in our preschools, in our homes, in our kindergartens being ready and doing that preparation. I do want to point out to folks, so there's a question from Allison, and I do want to point out to folks that we would ask each of you before you leave, after we're done sort of talking about questions at the very end, would you please use that link that I provided you to the summit survey and give us your feedback? That really helps us as we plan our future summits. So the best way to get started, and Teresa Furness is sharing another resource as well. So.
Oh, perfect. Yes. You know, the best way to get started, I think, is dive in with both feet and then start collecting data. So you can do what has been done before. You can do what somebody recommends. You can look at, here's what I think, you know, that I have about eight early childhood programs around me. They're going to these 3 districts, and I'm going to set up a kindergarten visit. I'm going to set up kindergarten teachers coming in here, take data on that, and then start all over next year. So each year we try a couple new things and then collect data, including parent participation, a quick parent survey. You know, we all know if you get a 20-question survey when you're shopping at Old Navy, you're not going to fill it out. But if you get something that's like 2 questions, that's really helpful. And even then can help guide to what you do. So, you know, going back to what we know are best practices, it would be a kindergarten visit. It would be reading those books with kindergarten bound children and talking about them. It would be having a representative from a major school district in your area come and talk to your families that night and be prepared for questions. You know, this was the first year we did that via Zoom, and it was really successful. I have to admit, years before, it would be a problem if a parent couldn't make it that night. You know, we would like, well, we can't record it. Like now you can record things real easy. So we've just all become a lot more tech savvy. So I encourage you to incorporate that in your planning as well. I think, you know, what we have done, I can share. Again, we're right in Franklin County. We are most of our children go to Columbus City schools. If you're familiar with Columbus City schools, there are many, many elementary schools, and there's also a school choice lottery. So parents around February to April they can just go to their home school, or they can select up to 3 elementary schools that they hope they can lottery into. And they may not know that their child got into a school until the end of August. So some things that we have done is we're lucky to have an elementary school close by. The children, pandemic notwithstanding, have gone over and visited that classroom, watched the daily activity, you know, a morning session in the morning. Their comments overwhelmingly over the years we've been here, and you know, we've been doing this 14 years, have been, oh, it's not that different. Or they also had those blocks. We had those counting bears too. So I think that goes a long way, that it's not big bad kindergarten. They're very excited to share. We invite parents to go to that as well. We've also had nights where parents go over with the principal next door. What we really love though is having that relationship with the elementary school adjacent to us. So we write letters to the kindergarten. The children have questions. A lot of that is, can you have food in your backpack? Can you bring toys? Do you have a playground? And the kindergartners can write back. We have a little Oprah day where kindergartners come over and are on a panel, and our pre-K can ask questions to them. And it really, you know, again, in working with that elementary school, the partnership that those kindergartners get to feel so big. You know, some of them are graduates of our program. So, you know, it's sort of like going back to your high school when you're in college or whatever, and seeing, yes, I was once you, but now I am a big kindergartner and can do so much. So they have, we've had that day before. And then we create a book of those questions that each child gets to take home. So write out, you know, the teachers will create a book where it was the child's question, the kindergartners answer, and then our pre-K children illustrate them. And we make everybody a book about kindergarten with their questions so that they can have that at home. And of course, give them an outline for parents, a guide in talking with kindergarten about their talking about the book and the transition to kindergarten with their family. So that's been a really worthwhile, fun thing to do. As you might guess, we were unable to do a lot of that in COVID 2020-21, but we're hopeful this year. We did virtual visits, we did our book, we did virtual questions, but we're hoping to get back to in-person this year, of course. And let me just make sure that I'm not missing anything. I think the landscape study too, that just came out on Wednesday that's referenced here is also a really great thing for us to keep in mind, the vast differences of the children coming into kindergarten and the vastly different experiences that they've had. And it's a good talking point, again, if you're trying to advocate for folks who maybe don't work directly with young children and families, and why you would need to be so prepared and go above and beyond to help for that successful transition. This really lays out the differences between what's experienced by a child who is at home and a child who has an early education experience. There's differences in the early experiences that children get, no matter if they're in a program. And something that was really called out was the amount of screen time that a child who did not have a pre-K experience had before coming to kindergarten. You can imagine, and I mean, certainly all of us who are parents can empathize that children who stay at home with a parent or other relative have a lot more screen time reported than other children who are in pre-K. And I know, Barb, you have your survey too.
I do. That's fascinating. I'm really glad that you shared these studies with us.
Mm-hmm.
I do want to thank Annalise Johnson for this presentation, all of her great ideas, and for kind of filling out that picture of whose role it is to be ready for kindergarten. And please, if you would, take the time to give us your feedback. Just, we've all been talking about data and surveys and getting feedback and the important perspectives, and yours is valuable to us and does help shape how we serve you. So I hope that you will complete the survey through the link there. Thank you so much for spending the day at our Leadership Summit. And while we hope that you could take some knowledge from today and apply it to your work tomorrow, certainly Annalise has given us some really practical things that we can turn around and do. That panel is just, I just was picturing it in my mind, and it just made me smile to think of a panel of kindergartners advising the preschoolers. But so effective. We do it in so many other stages of life. Why not that stage? They're capable of that.
Mm-hmm.
So please look out for emails from their Statewide Family Engagement Center, follow up on opportunities from this summit, and give us your feedback. We appreciate all of you, and thank you for making this day just a great day of learning with all of us. So, and Annalise, thanks for this presentation.
Yes, thank you. Have a great weekend, everybody.